Guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Darian with Darian the Dev, and thank you guys for tuning in to week 15 of the Career Progression Bootcamp. So I'm gonna get ready to go ahead and just make sure that everything is good with the audio. Alright, cool. So it looks like everything is good. So if you guys are brand new to the channel, if you're into tech, entrepreneurship, coding, startups, anything like that, make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me stay motivated to put this content out and make these videos for you guys. And if you're brand new, the Career Progression Bootcamp is like a weekly or like bi-weekly type of bootcamp, basically, where it's a self-paced curriculum where myself and some other professional developers just put together things that we work on throughout the week at our job and things like that. Side projects, whatever we're doing to get better as developers, we just condense it every week and we try to, present that and share that with you guys right here. So this week, I'm super excited. I worked on a hackathon all week at work, so I had to come up with some interesting stuff. We'll talk about it here, but in this this week's I guess episode or whatever of the boot camp, we're gonna be talking about natural language generation. We're talking about Power BI and gRPC is what Lai's gonna present on. So I'm super excited because I feel like it's different. It's different content. Like, it's still going to be coding and technical and everything, but we're going to get into some business tools, some analytics and data tools and stuff like that. I never used Power BI until this hackathon this week, so it'll be interesting to just kind of show you guys what I learned from it. So it's 6:30. I'm going to go ahead and call Lai and we can get the stream started. So go ahead and call her really quickly on Skype. Okay, cool. So she might still need a second before she's ready. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and flip my screen over. And I'll go ahead and get started with my presentation. And then whenever she's available, we'll go ahead and share her gRPC stuff. Alright, cool. Okay, so like I said, so this week I worked on a hackathon at work. If you guys don't know, I work at a automotive data company. So I'm still very new to the auto industry and things like that. So I'm still learning the ins and outs of kind of our systems, how everything works together, and kind of what we do as a company. And so there's so many different products and services. I work on one specific product. And so working this week on the hackathon was super interesting because I had to work with people not only remotely. There are people who I've never met. We were across maybe 3 or 4 different time zones. There's like language barriers, and then there's a vast difference in like technical abilities, expertise, specialties, and skill sets. So the hackathon was 3 days long, and we were challenged. My team in particular, every team got a different topic or a focus for their product, but they were all related to the business. So our team was given natural language generation. So we had to take some sort of automotive data and we had to create some sort of product or service that implemented natural language generation from the automotive data from our company. So that's what we ended up doing. That's what I'm going to be talking about right here. And yeah, so we're going to go ahead and just dive into it. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background as to why this is going to be such a different presentation this week. So everything that I'm learning right here, or everything that I'm sharing right here, is what I've learned over the last maybe 3 to 4 days of just nonstop hacking for this hackathon. But it was really cool because I feel like that's how you get the best I guess crash course and the best real self knowledge, real genuine knowledge, learning things from going through it, struggling, hitting a lot of walls, and figuring it out. So you guys are gonna be getting all that in this. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so natural language generation, and these are just definitions that I grabbed online just to keep it super short and simple. So in layman's terms, is a software process that transforms structured data into natural language. So we can feed it some sort of data source. It could be a CSV file, it could be an Excel file, it could be a database, whatever type of data we want. We can basically give some sort of data over to a natural language generation algorithm, system, whatever, and then it will make sense of that data in real readable language. So Power BI is a business analytics service by Microsoft. It's a lot more than that. It's super robust, and I don't even know a ton about everything that it can do because, like I said, I just started using it maybe like 3 or 4 days ago for this hackathon. So what I'm going to be showing you guys is super high level overview of Power BI, and we'll talk about some of what it can do and show some of that stuff off and how we used it for the hackathon. But just know that there's so much more to learn about Power BI. That could be a whole separate course in itself. You can go buy an entire course on how to use Power BI because of how powerful it is for data reporting, analytics, especially like visualizing data into graphs, maps, charts, anything you can think of very easily, and making it dynamic can all be done inside of Power BI. So it takes business analytics and business reporting to like a whole new level. And this is a great tool for anybody looking to go into like a business analyst role, which is a really well-paying role that could be in tech. So yeah, it's a really useful tool to know. And even if you're not a BA or something like that, if you're a developer, it's a great skill to know to incorporate into your products, apps, and it can provide a lot of business value out of the box, supported by Microsoft. So yeah, I'm not getting paid, by the way, to talk about Power BI, but I just thought it was cool because I'd heard a lot about it. My last company used Power BI, but I never got my hands on it as a developer, so I never got to truly see what it could do until this week. And then Aria Studio is an actual natural language generation plugin that we're going to be using within Power BI. So Power BI is one of the tools that Aria Studio can connect to, but it can connect to Tableau and other types of analytic tools. So you're not just limited to Power BI, but we're going to be looking at the Power BI version using Aria. All right, so there's different types of natural language technology. So we're using the bottom one here, natural language generation. But there's natural language understanding, which again, these are just super high level layman terms definitions. It's meant for extractive summarization. So you'll see that Aria gives us some of that. So inside of NLG, you could also have NLU, I suppose. Again, this isn't like set in stone. These aren't like concrete. They can only be one thing and they're all separate. Like I said, I think once you see the demo, I think you'll understand what I mean by like some of these can overlap, so you'll see how even though we are using NLG, we're still going to be, getting a summarization of our data with human readable language, text. And then natural language processing. This was really cool because this can basically identify different things within a body of text or data. So it can identify things like organizations or people's names or occurrences of things. It can make relationships between different entities. So I thought that was really cool. It can grab like keywords if you feed it like a huge paragraph of text or even like an entire book or something like that. It can tell you the words that are most frequently used or the keywords and define the text or the context around those keywords and what, it can make sense out of what's going on in the body of text. And like I said too, it's really cool how it'll basically pick things that are shown to be like organizations or schools or entities or people, Mr. and Mrs. It can identify like a lot of cool things if you just give it a big sample of text. So yeah, these are the different types of natural language technologies that are kind of floating around out there right now. So, and this is Aria Studio or Aria plugin. And this is what we are going to be taking a look at today. So I use for the hackathon. So again, like I said, we had to take some automotive data and we had to do something with it with natural language generation. We had to make sense of the data we were given and put it into a readable format. So we knew that with 3 days to do the hackathon, that we had very little time to really actually code something up from scratch. I mean, we could have leveraged we could have leveraged some things like Azure, I believe, has some things called like cognitive services that we were looking at, and there's a lot of like machine learning tools out there, and there's a lot of different ways to obviously approach the same problem. Oh, there we go. There's live. Hey, La, can you hear me?
You continue going. I'm sorry, I missed your call. I didn't know I missed your call, but go ahead.
No, you good. Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, we're just getting into the natural language here. So I was saying that basically we knew that we didn't have enough time to really try to do a whole lot of integrating with a bunch of different services that we weren't familiar with, and also too, a lot of us weren't like machine learning gurus or for the most part, even natural language processing or natural language generation. None of us had really worked with this type of stuff before. Some of the people on my team had played around with some NLP, NLG stuff before, but none of us had really implemented it into a project. So it was cool that even though we're all working remotely and everything, we still were all kind of taking a stab at something new, and we were trying to all figure out the best way of going about it. So we ended up splitting it up into like a couple of different approaches. So we had a few team members who split off and kind of did what they thought was the best approach that they could kind of think of, using their own technology, their own way of implementing the NLG. And then myself and another partner decided to go this route with the plugin and see if there was a way we could customize it to kind of fit what we were trying to do for the hackathon. So go to the next slide. All right, so this is Power BI. So once you download that last plugin I just showed you guys, Aria, you will be able to come into Power BI if you have an account, and you'll see this. This is your dashboard. And so within here, if I click on my workspaces, I can go in here and I can choose one of my workspaces. And so from in here, I have data sets. So these could be actually linked to databases if I wanted to. They could be linked to, in this case, CSV files or Excel files. So there's different types of data that we can connect to. There's a lot of other types that we can connect to as well, data sources. So don't quote me on everything, but this is a super powerful tool, and we can basically implement any data set we want right here inside this workspace, and then we can build different reports based on each of these data sets, or we can mix and match them however we want to do it. So now if we hop over to reports, we'll see that these are the test reports that we have set up, but these are all based on one or a combination of those data sets that are inside of this Power BI workspace. This is to give you kind of like an idea of how the Power BI workflow is going. So this is Aria Studio. So this is where we would go log in to actually. Now again, you can use Aria inside of you can use Aria Studio just inside of Power BI, but you're gonna be limited. So in that case, you're gonna see in a second when I show you guys a little example, you'll see that like I can't really customize the NLG to have the custom text that I want. So it's going to generate random text, and it's going to be giving me data about, or it's going to be analyzing the data that I give it using its own words. But what if we want to customize those words for our own reports, which in this case is what we wanted to do for the hackathon. So I'm going to show you guys why we had to use this right here, Aria Studio. And this is actually paid, guys. Like, we didn't pay for it. I was able to get in touch with a rep from Aria. So shout out to him. He was able to give me like access to a trial version because I told him that I was doing a hackathon for my job, and we were going to use the tool, the free version. So this is not something that is available out the box unless you're willing to pay for it, and I'm not familiar of what the prices are. So just to let you know that when you guys see this Aria Studio right here, this dashboard, this is the kind of paid tier, and we're using a free trial version of it. But when we're over in Power BI, those are the kind of free versions that we can use by just downloading the ARIA plugin. So you can still get the majority of these features, just not the customizations or the custom narratives that you'll see in a second. But anyway, this is the dashboard of ARIA Studio. And right here are projects. So each one of these is an individual ARIA project, and they have different data that represents, each project. So if I go here to new project, and I'm actually going to click describe the table. And so once I do that, the reason why I'm going to describe a table apparently is because in ARIA there's different ways of kind of binding your data so that you can use their system to, they have their own proprietary language. I'm kind of skipping ahead of myself. You're going to see. But basically, in order to easily write your custom narrative or your custom output, your custom natural language generation with this tool, you're going to want to make sure that you bind your data correctly. Otherwise, it's a real kind of pain in the ass to get all your data to be these variables over here. So I spent like a whole day just trying to set up my data properly, because as you can see right here, there's describe a JSON object. And what I was doing is I'm using an Excel file. So if I'm using an Excel or a CSV file and I'm trying to describe a JSON object, the mapping gets thrown off. The way that ARIA takes the data from the Excel sheet and tries to map it to the JSON object that it expects for its engine, so that we can, like I said, like I'm going to show you how we write custom code inside of here. But basically, it can't identify the variables if you incorrectly bind your data or map your data using these project types. So these are very, very specific to how you're bringing your data into ARIA, depending on your data format. So because I'm using a CSV file or an Excel file, you're going to want to use describe the table. So that took me like a whole day to figure out just that part. So we're going to describe the table. Once we do that, I can bring any, like I said, CSV file or Excel sheet into here, and I can drag it and drop it. And then this is why that's important for you to pick the right type of data. If I pick the right type of data, which in this case is a table, then it will actually map each of the columns for me to a variable name that represents all the data in that column. So this is basically just showing that based on the data that I gave it in my Excel file, now every column and all the data in it I can refer to by just this variable name now. So keep this in mind as you guys are going to see going forward here how we start writing the custom code. So as we come back, this is the compose section. So this is where we can actually write inside of here. Obviously, it looks very familiar. It's just like write our own, custom summary, narrative, whatever we want right here, whatever we want to show the user. We can make sense of all of our data and analytics, do all of our reporting by just writing code inside of here. Now, the tricky part about it is that they have their own custom language that they created specifically for this tool called ARIA. And the language is called ATL. But it's a language that is specifically written to work with ARIA Studio so that we can create these custom narratives based on our data. So like I said, those names of those variables, you can see them being used here. So model is being used here, make is being used here, version is being used here, option change is being used here, and you guys can see that these are right here inside my variables. So this is a drop down for variables right here, and it shows you all the variables that you have. If you map this incorrectly, none of these variables will be here, and you will still be able to access data from inside of your table if you map it incorrectly, but you'll have to write it by hand. There won't be any variables to reference everything in it, and it's going to make your life hell. It was a terrible time. I stayed up really, really late trying to figure out, again, when I was trying to map everything properly, I wasn't understanding how to access all my data. It was because of that improper mapping. If you do it correctly, like I said, all this is automatically mapped as soon as I upload my data into the project. So that was actually really cool in my opinion. So this is the function builder. Or the function tab, which has a function builder and all these other predefined functions that are given to us from ARIA. So a lot of them look familiar. They might be like they might look like a combination of SQL queries and a lot of other, maybe even some JavaScript functions. It's a combination of different things that you're already familiar with, but they combined, certain commonly used features that people are going to need to do, or functions that people are going to need to do reporting, and they pretty much bundled them up for you, so that all you have to do is figure out how to use the ATL syntax to then use those functions. So a lot of the functions, even if you're kind of new to programming, will make sense. And obviously they're pretty self-explanatory. So like date and times refers to all the functions that help us calculate the difference between dates and times, and adding days to certain dates that we get from our table and things like that. We can obviously do math, and we can even format data, so we can uppercase stuff. So for example, you can see a init cap right here. A init cap is a text function, and I'm able to basically capitalize the first letter of something, so the data comes in all capital letters initially, and I didn't want it to be that way, so I can use this init cap method to only capitalize the first letter, and then we're counting how many things are true, basically how many option changes that we recognize in our data set. So that's kind of giving you an idea of like how the syntax works. So you can kind of look at it and tell it looks kind of similar how we call functions and pass parameters and things like that, but very quirky when you guys see some of the documentation, which made it very tricky to be able to pull it off. Very cool if you can understand how to read the documentation and like utilize it to its fullest, which again, we had 3 days to do the hackathon, and I started working on this maybe day 2. So it was definitely a time crunch to even be able to get just what you guys are going to see for the demo. But if I spent more time, or if anybody spends enough time just kind of understanding the syntax, I'm sure that this is like extremely powerful, and you could really do some crazy cool, basically automated reporting analysis with this tool. So when I pass it a body of data, this is what that last query, or I don't know what to really call this query. It's called a narrative. It's a custom narrative, I believe is what it's called in ARIA. So this narrative, using this ARIA syntax to kind of represent some of my data, I put mainly the data that I'm running functions on in red. Excuse me, so that you could easily kind of point out where the natural language stuff is happening. So you can see that we're counting how many models we have. It's identifying the maker of the model, and we can also see how many different versions we have, and then we recognize how many price changes were in the data set that we gave it, and then we recognize the versions for all the vehicles that had a price change, and then we can also identify how many options were changed. And again, if I had more time, you could figure out, basically I was having trouble getting into more specific data about like which options changed for which vehicles, and then doing comparisons between the dates and saying, well, this changed since this date and that date. But like I said, like the learning curve of learning the new syntax is really what kind of made me limited with the tool. But like I said, if anybody wanted to get good at reporting for their own business, or like to level up skill for your job, or if you just want to have another kind of like tool in the tool belt, PowerBI and the tools that come with it are super incredible, because you could do stuff like this, which really makes number crunching a lot easier. Because once you take the time to learn that ATL language and you get good with it, you could write a custom data report, NLG report for every data set you need, and then just pass data in and let it generate a report for you. So it's like a one and done thing each time you do a report, and you don't have to sit there and manually look at all the data and try to figure out the correlations between things. So that's what I really like about it. So here's an example of the documentation itself inside of ARIA Studio for the ATL language. I'm not gonna leave this here too long, but just to give you guys an idea that basically I had to go through this documentation, and this is a part of using tools. Sometimes like you have to just jump in head first and not know even where to start, and just hope that they left good documentation. In this case, I honestly do think that ARIA left pretty good documentation for how to use the ATL programming language. Granted, this was very difficult for me, like this double square bracket syntax and everything. Trying to write my own custom functions using that was very, very tricky. That's why I said, like, when it started getting to more complex functions, it started getting difficult, not because of the logic, but just because of the language and not knowing exactly what it's doing and how it works and things like that. So That was interesting. But again, I thought it was really cool that they took the time as a company to create their own programming language, compiler, or however it's working under the hood to make sure that their users could get any sort of custom functionality they wanted without you feeling limited inside their product. So I thought that was really cool. So this is back over in Power BI. So once we've gone over there and configured the project and set everything up and import our data into ARIA Studio, we can come back over to Power BI, and now we're ready to actually integrate our plugin, what we just made over there with our custom summary. We're able to integrate that back over here into Power BI. So as you see over here, we've got the data that we're using from the data set. So that's all over here now. I have none of these checked at the moment, so you see nothing over here in this kind of content area. So what we're gonna do is so what I just did in this next screenshot, I guess you couldn't see my cursor and everything in that last screenshot, but really if I click this ellipses here, I'll get the option to add visuals or get custom visuals, and I can then import the ARIA plugin that we downloaded, or that I technically showed that we would have downloaded in the very beginning of the stream. So download that plugin first. And then once it's a part of your Power BI organization, you can just import the plugin like this. So then now I can obviously see that I have a new ARIA blank content project, or whatever it be called right here. So now I just need to start bringing in whatever data I want to create my ARIA report from. So I'm going to select basically, any data that I want from my data set, and it's going to populate all of it in here inside of my little ARIA project. So you guys can see right here that I'm on configure narrative right now, and I have create custom narrative. So what we just did in the ARIA Studio is we created a custom narrative. But in this case, what comes out of the box with Power BI is this configure narrative, right? So this is what's done for us out of the box. So this is what I meant by kind of that free version that you can just use out of the box. But even though it's powerful, it's a little bit more limited in how you can report your data. So cool. So this is me after clicking next off that last slide. It's just going to give us more options here to just say, how do you want us to make sense of the data? If you want to basically show a change over a certain time period, you can select a column that has a date in it, and then you can say how you want to show the data based on that time or that field. So we just keep walking through this, and then at the very end we get 3 options: summary, important things, and tell me everything. And these are the 3 options that we have out of the box from ARIA that will basically tell us how or what type of summary we want created of our data. So once it does the analysis, that's already generated by ARIA, how do we want it to tell us the story of what's going on in the data? Do you want us to tell you everything? So in this case, we're looking at, all the important data that was able to generate. We can look at the only important things. In a lot of cases, this will show down to almost 1 sentence if you go to important things, unless you have a lot of data going on, and then it'll tell you, only the key things. And then summary is, a little bit less lengthy than tell me everything, but still just highlights the main important changes in your data set. So I just think this is really cool, because out of the box, if we didn't want to do the custom summary that I was working on, then this still would work as a viable solution technically in our hackathon, in terms of us taking a data set and implementing it as a business use case and generating natural language from the data set. Even though we didn't write any custom code to generate this right here, what we're looking at right now, it still serves the same purpose without writing any code. And I think that kind of goes to show you the power of Power BI, plugins, integrations, APIs, and just knowing how these things work. Even if you're not a software developer, like even if you're a business person and you have the ability to hook up a ARIA plugin to Power BI, import a data set, create a visual around it, and write a custom narrative that you can then show people based on any data set in real time, like that would just make you so valuable. So I think this is just good to know, even though, like I said, I didn't necessarily write code for this right here. It was good to know at this point, once we saw this working, that we could use this as a proof of concept. If the custom narrative that I was working on, if it failed, we could always fall back on this. So that's just something to keep in mind that we were thinking about. So what we want to do is use that custom narrative that we just created in ARIA Studio to actually show the custom summary inside the project here in Power BI. So we want to click on create custom narrative right here. And obviously I've blocked out my app ID, but here's my key, and my app ID will go here, and this is generated from ARIA Studio once we actually publish that project that I was showing you guys. There's a publish button, and once we publish it, it'll generate us an API key and an ID for us to use, or a URL. And again, I would click describe a table, but right now it's gonna say describe object because it was just me taking a screenshot. But then once that's connected, so really I would click open with Studio, and then it'll open up this thing called Studio Runner. So what Studio Runner does is it takes your published ARIA Studio application or project, whatever you want to call it. Once you publish that, it basically exposes an endpoint that allows you to use this Studio Runner to basically post data or make calls to your API from your ARIA project. So what you do is once you publish that project, you're going to get the ID and the API key. You're going to input it here. And then this is the very next screen once you log in. It's very simple. So once you pass those credentials and you're able to get in, you're now hooked directly into that project that we created in ARIA Studio. So now we can upload data here, and this is basically a GUI for making a post request to an API. So we can upload any data set here and see immediately the response we would get from our API. So in this case, if I pass it a new data set, you'll see how it responds using that custom format that we wrote. So this data represents changes to 11, and then again, it recognizes all the different models that we have, and then it also recognizes how many different versions there are, and then it identified all the different pricing changes for all these different vehicles. Whoop, whoop. And then lastly, it detects how many option changes there were. So again, this is helpful for the people who work on the research side of our business. But again, you could tailor this to any sort of business model or anything. This report, again, like you can customize it if you use ARIA and the ATL syntax or the ATL language. You can customize the support to say or show whatever you want, which I think is really cool and powerful. So the last thing is, now once all that's wired up, how do we get it published? How do we get it into an application and use it? So back over here inside of Power BI, if we go to File and we go to Embed, we can simply grab an iframe right here that allows us to use it inside of any application, which is amazing. So over here, to show you an example, just a simple HTML file, drop in the iframe inside of a body of HTML file, open it in the browser, and then you'll see that we're connected here, and I'm seeing the same thing inside of a browser. So as you can see, like this is a paragraph that's coming from up here. This is a paragraph. The top part is a little cut off in the screenshot, but so yeah, again, so right now I can't actually show you guys the API actually working in the browser here, where you'd be able to see the summary, because our resource group is actually down, and we're having a issue with getting that to make the call right now, because they cut the resource group off for the deadline. So our pipeline is a little thrown off. So we won't be able to actually test, the finished product working in the web version until tomorrow morning, which is interesting. It's just part of a hackathon, part of learning. So, but yeah, so the worst case scenario, we're going to show that manual demo that I just showed you guys. We're going to show that if we're not able to connect this. But as you can see, using the iframe in an HTML file does allow you to connect it here. So even if we weren't able to get the custom narrative working here, if we just simply went to configure narrative, you could still see that automatically generated ARIA NLG based on your data set right here. And you can customize it based on your times or data, whatever you want to do. And it would show right here, and that's all in the free version as well, by the way. All right, so to wrap it up, in summary, we talked about the different types of natural language technology. So we got NLG, NLP, and NLU. So it's natural language generation, natural language processing, and natural language understanding. Power BI is a powerful data analytics and reporting tool for businesses, and is super important for business analysts and developers, because if you're a developer that knows it, you can leverage it to do a lot of cool things that help businesses out. or to make your apps really cool, useful, and more meaningful, give you more meaningful insight. Or if you're a business analyst, it'll just level your skills up because it's a tool that business analysts are going to definitely either need to know or fall in love with once you learn it. We learned about ARIA Studio and the PowerBI plugin for it. We learned about the ATL programming language and what it is. And we also talked about how to leverage ARIA and PowerBI to generate custom natural language reports based on our own data, and how to embed our final NLG summary to a web page using the iframe. So that was my week, guys. I'll let you guys know in another video next week how the hackathon actually goes, like what the feedback is that we get. That's not the only thing that we're going to have in our hackathon. We have, like I said, another group of team members who made their own kind of service, and we're bringing them all together to make kind of a natural learning machine learning kind of dashboard for our business's data. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'll let you guys know, but yeah, that was my learning for the week. So if you don't have any questions, I'm gonna switch you over. Can you still hear me, La?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. All right, it's all yours.
Yeah, I'm a little bit behind time, but
Oh, okay.
I guess so I can give a little intro. I can just give a little intro into what I'm doing before actually my slides sort of shows.
Okay.
So I guess this week, as I'm preparing to start to code out a project, I was just thinking about using the stack that I use currently at work, which is Go on the back end with Postgres and GraphQL and React and Redux on the front end. So I had saw before, so I was just trying to get started with using Go, so I was doing some work on that, and I came across this gRPC that goes with Go. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I thought we use it, in which we do. So I started to learn a little bit more about it and figuring out how I can use it in my project. Based on what I tell you now, I don't think I'm going to use it. I think I'm going to make this project be more of a monolithic project. However, I definitely want to present on it, and I do think that I want to probably do 2 parallel projects somehow and try to use this. And I think it sort of goes more so with the concept that you were talking about with the functions and calling different functions. But it's not, I mean, you can use gRPC in cloud, but you don't have to use it in cloud. So, yeah. So that's pretty much why I came with this direction this week.
Okay, I got you on the microservices slide right now, even though you probably can't see it, but that's where I left it because that seemed like the first major content, so I just left it there.
Alright. So today I'll talk about, pretty much I just gave you the overview of what to talk about. I'll go more so, I'm going to talk a little bit about types of APIs, what gRPC is, some pros and cons for using it, summary, and a conclusion. So let's move forward. So first we'll talk about microservices and importance. Like I said before, that I was going to use it, but then I thought about it. I don't think I want to do a microservices as my first app right now. I think I want to work more on a monolithic app, just so I can compare the differences to it. So why gRPC is important, because it's pretty much is intended to be used with microservices, not per se intended to be used with monolithic apps. And so, when we talk about microservices, we just think about an app that, that is built in different languages. So, if you have some type of a business, say you have a pizza shop or something like that, or a restaurant, and you have an inventory app or something for just purchasing app. These apps can be built in different languages. However, you can have one central database, a central data source, and central server that you want all these apps to connect to. But again, these individual apps do not have to be in the same language; they can be in different languages. So pretty much, what you want to do is you want to exchange that information, because all these different apps are functions of your businesses, and it's important for all these apps to sort of work together in order to provide the best service for your customer. So when you have these microservices, you have a lot of things you have to agree on or to make it work smoothly. You have to figure out the API, which API you're going to use to exchange data. Because like I said, although you have 3 different services, they might still all rely on the same type of data. So you might want to specify which particular data you're going to use for which particular service. In addition, you also want to think about the data format. How would you like this data to be returned? Or how would you like the data to be given to the API? And load balancing. You want to make sure that you don't have repetitive data. That if I have one service doing something, that if something happens, I don't have another service operating without the information it needs to perform. So load balancing pretty much make sure that you don't have any redundant services occurring. B, that your balance per se, that, all the services are equally distributed amongst all the services you have. And C, that it's pretty much you have an algorithm of such that helps you decide which is the best way to proceed when you're conducting these services or the order and the apps that you're using. So, all right, we'll go to the next slide.
Yep, I flipped it, but it's going to be a little behind. So I'm gonna probably start flipping, like when you get midway through each one, I'll probably start flipping.
Okay. All right. So that's pretty much microservices, which talks about, well, I didn't really tell you what gRPC is yet, but just understanding what microservices are, as we move forward, you'll understand why gRPC is helpful for microservices with all the things that microservices have to think about when you're using them. Now, microservices, we talked about also an API and how gRPC sort of replaces this concept of this API. So when you have an API, there's a couple things you have to think about. And gRPC, again, is assisting to make your microservices more efficient. Again, it's trying to replace or make your API a lot more efficient as well. So things we think about when we have an API are we think about how do we want to model the data? Do we want to use JSON or XML? Although most services today probably use JSON, but you still pretty sure there's services out there that have that question in mind. You have to think about the endpoints. What endpoints you want to have to hit to get certain data that you need for your app. You want to think about how you want to invoke, or you want to handle errors. If the data doesn't come back, then how you want to, what responses do you want to provide to your front end so your front can let the user know that the data wasn't available or something didn't go as expected. You think about the efficiency of the API. I know for me, one thing I struggle with a lot as I start building more robust apps is that I might, for example, in my React app on a component did mount, I might want certain amount of data to be there when my component mounts. However, it might be an app where you're logging in. So you log in first and you have to go through this whole token exchange thing. And after the token exchange, I need to send it back to get the user. Then I need to get the user. I need the user to get some other information. And that turns into like 3 or 4 different calls. And because I use Fetch and because I use Fetch and because I use Fetch per se, I have to make each one of those calls like 5 different calls. And because you use HTTP, you have to make 5 separate calls to get all that data. And sometimes it's, I don't think it's the most efficient way to do it all the time. So that's something you think about a lot when you're doing your API. And because if you use a regular REST API, you don't have a lot of variety of ways of getting your data back. You're sort of stuck with certain structures of getting your data back. Also, you got to think about latency when you think about your API. And again, we're talking about using multiple APIs and concurrently for like a microservices use. We're also talking about scalability. How do we scale these APIs if we have multiple clients and multiple people using or hitting your API at one time? What about load balancing your API? How are you going to keep in the order of who gets what request at what time? How do you make sure these requests aren't duplicated? How about how does your API work with different languages? And what about authentication, monitoring, and logging? These are all the things that you have to think about with your API as well. So with that in mind and with microservices in mind, we get down to what is the purpose of gRPC? gRPC sort of acts like a well, first I guess we start. It's a free and open source framework that was developed by Google. It works alongside your Docker, Kubernetes as part of that cloud native computation foundation. And what it pretty much does, it allows you to define request and response for your remote procedure calls. And it handles all your REST for you. So how does that, I guess, what does that pretty much mean? So if we have a microservices and we have one server and we have 3 or 4 different apps that are my different microservices that's going to hit those services, It makes it easy instead of me having an API where I have to call get all receipts or get all bills or show me one inventory, which becomes multiple calls. You can do one call, one request, and one response call, and that one request and response call can have everything you need in it. So like my first example when I said that you have to log into my app and then I have to go get the users and I have to go back and get the user things that they need, like their profile data information. I can use one remote procedure call and that can get all that information for me at that one time. So I don't have to have those 3 or 4 or 5 different calls that I would do with the API. Other things that gRPC does as well is it's modern, it's fast and efficient. It's also built on top of HTTP. So instead of HTTP, right now, the current HTTP that we use is 1.1. So it's built on top of that, so it's called HTTP2. And this was also built and developed by Google. I'll talk a little bit more about which HTTP2 is and how it differs from HTTP1 and why that's very important. And it's pretty much the backbone or the core of gRPC, and it allows gRPC to be efficient in the areas that I talked about previously, with the microservices issues it might have or the API issues it might have. This HTTP2 model allows it to address all those issues in a very efficient and effective way, in a very fast way too. gRPC also has low latency. It supports streaming. So you have the idea like, you have the open call where you don't have to do the client server call. You can just keep your stream open and, listen and have an event listener listen for a call being made. It's language independent, meaning that you can use whatever language you want with this. You don't have to have a particular language. If you want to use Java, you want to use Go, you want to use C#, you want to use JavaScript, whatever language you want to use, it pretty much handles most languages. And it's super easy to plug in with your authentication, your load balancing, logging, and monitoring. So how do we use it? So like I said to you before, one of the backbones of the core is these protocol buffers, because the protocol buffers allow you to make your requests and your responses. And it deals with a lot of things that we talked about with the HTTP. So I'll go over briefly here, but I'll explain a little bit more detail as we move along. The protocol buffers are language agnostic again, so you can use whatever language you want with them. It's very convenient for transporting a lot of data because one, is binary. So what do I mean by binary? So we know that the binary data is the data that's closest to the machine language data. So being that protocol buffers is binary, that's what makes it language agnostic, meaning that it talks directly to the machine. And because it's binary, it makes it very, very fast. It's efficient because it sends small serialized payloads. And serialized meaning that it won't come across your network in regular text files. Mm-hmm. It's going to be sort of coded. So it's going to be serialized in a way that people can't just sort of read your data as it goes across, as opposed to the way data sort of is transported now when you use the HTTP/point. Mm-hmm. So go to the next one. Okay. Protocol buffers.
Yeah, I flipped it. It's lagging.
No worries. So protocol buffers, just to rehash again what the services that they provide, what do they do, in a summation form, and what are the benefits of them. Number one, the service that the protocol buffer provides is responsible for that whole request and response syntax. So that whole, all the requests you send from your server to your client is responsible for that. It's also responsible for creating the endpoint. Also, the definition of API is independent from implementation. So that means that using your API with this gRPC is independent from wherever you have your API implemented. So how can I say that differently? So again, I sort of think of a gRPC like a composition. So it's like I'm making a whole bunch of API calls and I'm composing all those calls into one function call, and that's my gRPC call. So that's why I'm sort of independent of my API calls, because it doesn't rely on that call. I can take whatever API calls out of that, and that still will be the same function with my gRPC. So it's a little bit independent in that regard, so to speak. What are the benefits? It saves network bandwidth. And how does it do that? Talked again about the whole binary concept. Because it's binary, it's faster. It's faster across your network because it's already talking to machine can't code language. It doesn't have to be broken down any further. It's less CPU intensive. I'll go back to, I'm sorry, that's not why it's, what I explained to you just now, the reason why it's CPU intensive, less CPU intensive has to do with the fact that it's binary. Because that is in binary form, meaning that your computer doesn't have to do a lot of work to translate into human readable language. So that's what that is. You save network bandwidth. I'm going to save that to explain that when we get to the differences between HTTP1 and HTTP2. And thus, that makes it much faster and more efficient communication because you save network bandwidth and it's less CPU intensive on your computer. We'll go to the next one. So this is just a brief example of the RPC code. This is as simple as it looks. So your client side will be something like, you'll have a server.create an event. You'll pass the event that you want to be created. And then there's on the other end, your server code, it'll be the function and it'll have all your event information. It's just very simple as that. Behind it.
Okay. Yeah, I got you on the HTTP1 slide.
Yeah, I'm faster than you didn't think.
Yeah, this is a little lag on YouTube, I see.
Okay. Alright, so we'll move to HTTP1. So HTTP1, like I said before, the first line I want to make sure I'm clear that gRPC, which makes it very intriguing and why it's so fast and it's so much more beneficial, is that it leverages HTTP2 as a backbone for its communication. So we think about HTTP1, there's things that we already know. First thing we should know about it is that it's been around for a long time. HTTP's been around since the internet protocols have been around. I think 1985 is saying. We haven't changed it since 1997, sorry. Was when it was released. We haven't changed it since then. So a couple of things that are interesting in HTTP is that it's your typical client server. The client makes a request to the server sends it back to the client, and the server can't respond to the client makes a request. That's your typical HTTP1. Which some things I didn't know, I don't know why I didn't notice, that every time you do that interchange, that client makes a request to the server, that's a new TCP connection being made. I wasn't aware of that. So that's pretty interesting if you think about it. So let's think about it from a React app standpoint, right? A React app standpoint is very interesting because it's a front-end application. So why is that interesting? Because that's interesting because it always comes with assets. Meaning you have your images, you have your logos, you have your text, your HTML text files, you have your JavaScript text files, you have all these different assets that get bundled together and it gets sent across the network to your server, right? Mm-hmm. What I didn't know is that when you do an HTTP request, each asset opens a different connection. So if you send over images, that's one connection. You send over JavaScript, that's another connection. You send over HTML, that's another connection. So these are new connections being opened every single time you send over that React app. So that's where I was talking to you about saving network bandwidth. Every time you open that connection, you're using your network bandwidth.
Yeah. And then when you do the gRPC, it would reduce that from 4 to 1 or whatever it was, however many calls you made to just 1.
Yep, so I'm going to show you how, when we get to the next HTTP2, I'll talk about how they do that. But yes, exactly. That's definitely what gRPC does. It definitely reduces that from, it's only one. No matter how many assets or whatever you have, it will only be one TCP connection every time. Another thing that HTTP does, that it doesn't compress your headers. What do I mean by that? It passes your headers over as plain text because we need to human readable. We want to read what's coming over your headers, right? We want to read the bearer token. We want to read all that information. So we read that information. So it's sending us to it in plain text. It's not compressing it. It's not turning that into binary data, which would make it way faster to be able to do that if it was compressed into binary data. So that's another thing that HTTP does. And it only works with request response, meaning no server push. Meaning, like I said before, that your client has to trigger a server response. If the client doesn't request something, the server will never respond. So your server just won't independently respond based on knowing that you need things. So, like I was saying, my first example, in a regular HTTP, if I know that every time my app opens, I need to make 4 requests, get the login, 1 to get the user, and 1 to get the user profile information. I could never automatically trigger that by the server by making that 1 request of login. I have to go log in, give me back the token, then I have to go get the user information. I have to go that back and forth response every single time.
So let me ask you this then. So for example, the way I think about it, when you say I need to make 4 calls, when I first open a page or start my application. So in React, I think about that being in a on component did mount, or a use effect or something like that. And if I had like multiple fetch calls in that on component did mount or use effect, they could likely interfere with each other. Like the data could be interfered with due to state updating or not, and like all these different things, and they could kind of cross each other's wires. So how or does gRPC alleviate that? And if so, well, yeah, I guess would it alleviate that in some sort of way?
No,
like,
it won't alleviate that in that regard because that's more of an individual app thing. Pretty much what that comes down to is that you have to just set state once. You have to get all your data back and set state one time. You can't set state 4 times. So that's where I was saying to you about more part of my problem. But what happens with that is that now you have to make calls within calls within calls because now you have to be within scope. You know what I mean? So like once you make that first call, you have to make that next call within that call so you can stay within that scope so you can have access to that data. Then you have to make that next call within that call. So you know what I mean? So that's what I was saying, that you're right. This is going to sort of get to that, but I won't be able to address that like you're saying from an individual perspective. I'll be able to address that from a bigger perspective, from how I create my app, whether it's a microservice app or from a bigger level of that regard, as opposed to more of a micro level of what you're talking about. But yeah, that is the issue that I'm talking about with this. Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
The other issue too with HTTP 1 that hasn't been changed is that originally, I mean, you have more calls now, but originally it was only composed of 2 commands, get and post. And even with the other calls they have now, patch, delete, put, still sometimes you need to make different calls that you don't quite need. Like for example, even when you're doing like login, you have to make it as a post. It's not quite a post call for a login, but you have to use that because you don't have any other verbs to use in this system. So HTTP 2. This was released in 2015. It's another Google thing. Google created this to address a lot of the issues that, of course, we just talked about in HTTP 1. So the first thing it does is it supports multiplexing. What does that mean? That a client and server can push messages over the same TCP connection. So like we were just saying before, that now you could make that one call and get, like I was saying to you before, like where we have to make, what we were just saying now, we have to make that login call, that user call, and that whatever call. Now you can write that whole call system inside your gRPC and now make that one server call. So there's only one TCP connection opening up, and now you're able to make that call and hit 4 different points, four different API calls in the back end using gRPC with only one TCP connection open at one time. So that sort of cuts down from having to make that 4 different those 4 different calls. But again, on a bigger scale, it wouldn't be in that example. I guess on a bigger scale, it would be something like if you were having something like, I don't know, I guess it could, on that same scale, it would be something like, all right, say we had it, instead of making it a monolithic app where we had the user, the login right there, like how you were saying at your job, say we had a one API for just the login. That was just straight login. We had that one API. All that API did was login. Then we had an API. We just held all our user-sensitive data. Didn't have any profile data, just user-sensitive, like the credit card information, social security, whatever that stuff was. That all was the API. Then we had an API that held all their like profile, maybe the data we needed for the app, all that information. You know what I mean? So in that case, that would be more of a microservices app where now we need to hit each one of the services. So if you think about it in that way, you would have like a gRPC in the middle of that. And that gRPC will be the one that all 3 of those calls connect to. And you're just making that one call to that gRPC, and that is addressing all those calls in the back end. So now instead of having to open 3 TCP connections, it's only one connection because you're only calling that gRPC function. You're not calling all 3 of those individual API functions. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does actually. Yeah, that was a great way to put it.
All right. So then the next one is the server can push. So like I just said to you now, using which is dope about HTTP 2 is that it's almost funny because it almost works sort of like how your sockets work, where now it's a stream stays open now, so now your server can make those calls. So now when I was saying to you before, you had to call to get the login. Once you get the login, get the token, then you make a call once you get the token. Now you don't have to do that because the stream is open. You can hit that first login call, and once that login has the token there, everything will work in the back end. You can call itself, and you don't have to keep
yeah.
The stream is open.
Yeah, because it's not just one. It's not just one and done. It's not just one and done like a Exactly.
So then also it supports header compression. So now you don't have to worry about it all being, you can compress all the headers and have to send a header for each one of these calls. And before, that's another issue too. Before, like every call, like the login has its own header, the call to the user has its own header, the login to the profile has its own header. And this down here, you can compress the header, so you don't have to send each header for each call. So that makes it a little bit easier as well. It also binary, so it's no text, so it makes it faster, and it saves your bandwidth in that regard. And it's secure. It already comes in with your SSL is not required but recommended by default, so it's already secure. So this is the newest changes that Google made to that to make it work. So that's pretty much just my beginning. That's pretty much my end of it, but my beginning to the end of the gRPC. So that's pretty much the tool of it. I just wanted to get the overview of it. I will use it for my project, so I pretty much think that I'm going to work with these series of videos that I pretty much gave everybody pretty much the update of everything I'm working on. I think from this point on, I'll be actually doing hands-on stuff. It'll be more of my slides. It'll be pretty much a combination of all the information I talked about when I talked about the GraphQL, the hooks, gRPC. I've done Go. And that's pretty much what I'm going to be building my apps on this time coming up now. So I'll spend time moving forward on, addressing the things that come up with the app.
Cool. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I mean, I've only glanced over like articles that I've read and things like that kind of relate or refer to a gRPC, but never really dove into it or used it myself. So great first introduction. The only time I've heard it was in a comparison to GraphQL at that GraphQL meetup I went to that time, and there was a guy there who didn't really understand the benefit of GraphQL, and he was like, well, couldn't this kind of be done with gRPC? And I didn't really have a point of reference to really understand how he was making that comparison. So
well, I would say, the only thing I would say to him is that I don't think so. How I view it, I could be wrong. I view gRPC, what GraphQL does for data, I feel like gRPC does for the API. So GraphQL allows you to be able to, instead of like, if you had a user, if you had just keep it simple, you had an author who had many books, and the books had many categories. And so, you had different models for each one of those. GraphQL allows you to use one query to get all those connected information, as opposed to HTTP, where you have to do all these SQL queries, all this extra stuff you do, or make all these different endpoints or these endpoint requests. You have to get the separate. You have to get probably have to get the user books first, or you can probably get a relationship with user.books. You know what I mean? But you can't get user.books. It just becomes more complicated. Where GraphQL allows you just to cherry pick and get what you want and how you want it in one smooth query. I think this gRPC does the same thing for API, where you might have an API with like 5 different methods to get different things done. gRPC allows you to pick which API methods you want from whatever microservices you want. If you have 5 different microservices, you can combine them all in one gRPC call and put them together. So this is how I view it. I view it that it does that for that.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So it makes it powerful in that regard. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it has load balancing. It lets you know which API to use. So it does that for you.
It almost sounds like orchestration a little bit, like between.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds. That's what it reminds me. That's what I think of. But
it allows you to do it. You're right. So it sort of allows you to do. Allows you to sort of streamline your app a lot smoother. When you're dealing with microservices, though, you know what I mean? It's really that's what I'm saying. So that's why I don't really see. I can see what he's saying, but I would say that it would be just for APIs. I wouldn't say it would be for data like GraphQL is.
Yeah, well, that was great, La. So yeah, y'all, that's us wrapping up week 15 right there. So let us know. We see y'all dropped us a couple of likes. We really appreciate that. Let us know in the comment section if y'all happen to watch the playback. Let us know if you have any questions or comments about anything. We'd love to hear it and get back up with y'all about that. And we will continue to work on some stuff this upcoming week. Like I said, I'm wrapping up this hackathon tomorrow, so I'll be into some new content this week. And then hopefully, if all goes well, we'll be back here next week for week 16. So appreciate y'all for tuning in. We'll see y'all next week, all right? Peace.